talk. I'm going to give a minute or two more for people to sign on who might have difficulty connecting. So hang in, we'll start at exactly 6:02. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to each and every one of you, and thanks for participating in tonight's very important meeting. My name is Joe Mihevc. I've been contracted by the city to facilitate tonight's meeting and to act as a community engagement facilitator on this project. This meeting will run between now, 6 o'clock-ish, and 8 p.m. Next slide. As is the emerging and wonderful tradition at City Hall, we start with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge on our behalf that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly forcibly displanted Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. I will now introduce the panelists for this evening. We have myself. I'll be acting as the community engagement facilitator and making sure that things pass from one to another efficiently and smoothly. We have Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam, Ward 13, Councillor and the Councillor for the Bond Place shelter. We have Justin Lewis, and I asked Councillor Wong-Tam if you want to wave, just to, I'm sure everyone knows you, but just to be sure. We have Justin Lewis, who's the director of the SSHA. You want to wave, Justin? Thank you. We have Monica Waldman, manager of social shelter support and housing administration. She's with us as well. And we have David Raycraft, director of housing services with Dixon Hall. Next slide, please. So this is how we're going to run today's discussion. First, on the purposes side. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide a status update on the city's COVID-19 response for people experiencing homelessness. It is also to provide an overview of the Bond Place Hotel and the services and supports currently in place and planned for this particular site. There'll be a large amount of time devoted to responding to questions and concerns from the community. And all of this is in an effort to begin the successful integration of the shelter in this community. You can see from the agenda, for those who are able to connect with video, we have welcoming remarks. We'll start that in a second with Councillor Wong Tam. We have a presentation that from city staff and from the staff of Dixon Hall that will take about 45 minutes. The questions and answer and feedback will be 70 minutes, and closing and wrapping up will be for 5 minutes. That will take us until 8 o'clock. The presentation may seem a bit long. It's 45 minutes, but there is a lot of information that the city staff and the staff of Dixon Hall want to cover, and I think you'll find it very informative. You may want to see that there are questions and answer and feedback. You can put in writing if you have any questions right off the top. We will be permitting that with this computer WebEx technology. It is on the bottom left of your screen. Although the answers will not be answered until we have the feedback portion in about 45 minutes. So in introducing Councillor Wong Tam, let me say this. As the facilitator, Councillor Wong Tam is here to listen. She will not generally be answering questions. This is a time for city staff and Dixon Hall, to be presenting what they are doing. So she's here in listening mode, except for these welcoming comments. Over to you, Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Joe, for opening this meeting in such a good way, and it's so good to be here with all of you. I really wish we were together in one physical space, in one room where we can actually see each other, hug each other, shake hands, because that's generally the way we like to have conversations. But unfortunately, because of this year's pandemic, this is a bit of an odd format. And even for myself, now that I've been teleworking for the past almost 8 months, I'm not sure if I'll ever get used to it, but this is unfortunately the way business is conducted right now, is how we keep each other safe by staying apart. So I just want to welcome everybody to this discussion. And Joe, thank you for that opening facilitation. I just want to also highlight the fact that although Joe has said that I'm here to listen, because this is a staff meeting, so that means that the city staff are organizing this meeting, they're coming out to you with information. I do want to recognize that I will make myself available to answer questions. If questions are directed to me, I will not shy away from them. But I do know that the programmatic changes that you're going to hear about with respect to the Bond Hotel, they will most likely have at the very best all the technical and logistical answers that I probably will not be able to answer. And that's probably why they're going to get most of the time on the floor, to try to give you as much good information as possible. And the presentation that you're going to see is most likely going to perhaps even answer some of the questions that are popping up in the chat. But a few things I want to share with you right off the bat. When I found out that the Bond Hotel program was changing, some of the first things I said to the city staff was, we need to go out in front of the community as quickly as possible with good information, accurate information, so they know what is coming. That is absolutely critical. I want you to have that information, and that's what's being presented to you today. About 2 weeks after I was notified that this was happening, the facility is now open, and of course you now have a new operator, which you'll be introduced very shortly. The other immediate things I brought to staff's attention is that we already have cited some challenges in the neighborhood that have to be addressed. So how do we ensure that the changes to the Bond Hotel program is not going to make the situation worse, but rather make it better, and also be able to help people who are extremely vulnerable. So if we have challenges around community health and safety, we have to make sure that this service does not change things, but only make things better in the community. And that is something that city staff are going to try to address in their responses today. Things that I know that that have been advocated for, and I think that they are coming, which is important to me, and I hope it's important to you as well, is around community safety and making sure that there's adequate security and staff at this location so that the residents who are staying there will be safe. But also, just as important is that the residents outside the building and also the business owners and the patrons and the visitors and the students who are coming back to both St. Michael's Choir School as well as Ryerson, the faculty administration, are going to be safe. COVID has generally changed the type of foot traffic that has been coming into the area. We have largely been an area that has been very much reliant on tourist activity. And we know that, and that things are not going to return back to normal, perhaps sadly, anytime soon. So we want to make sure that all of these considerations are going to be very seriously dealt with by the operator of the Bond Hotel. And in that case, I know that they have, we have made that, I've made that evidently clear, as my staff. One thing I will share with you is that we've already had weekly established stakeholder meetings, which I think are critically important. Those stakeholder meetings that are taking place have largely been represented by very different individuals from the community, and they've been working out those issues, and they will continue to meet. So there will be a regular place to have conversations with the community. And then finally, I just want to say I'm a downtown resident. I'm a new mom. I have a 15-month toddler at home. He may end up making a little bit of noise in the background, so forgive me if that happens. But I walk these streets. I walk it with a stroller. And it's critically important to me that downtown Toronto remains a safe, vibrant, inclusive, and welcoming place for everybody. And I take those comments to heart. I'm very serious about them. And so I know that we're all going to, as a community, do the very best that we can with the cards that are get dealt to us, but also to make sure that this addition to the community is not going to necessarily be harmful. But hopefully what we're going to learn tonight is that this model of service delivery is going to be different. And certainly from what I've seen so far, based on what the staff have described to me, is that there's going to be an enhanced level of service with respect to a focus on health and community, wellness and community, and safety and community. And all those things are items that I know that we all share and values that we all strive for. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wong-Tam, for your comments and for hanging out for the whole meeting. That's much appreciated by us all. So as we get into the presentation, and as people are thinking of questions or how they're going to engage the meeting, let me say this. Participation in an online engagement event is not like participating in an in-person event. All participants have an even greater role to play to achieve a successful online engagement event. And of course, this is new for all of us to be doing so much work online, and we're all trying to figure this out. We will be, of course, doing one voice at a time, and the voice questions will be activated during the Q&A in about 40 minutes or so after the presentations are done. Whether it's by voice or by written questions, and your written questions can be submitted at the bottom right side. You'll see a Q&A if you are connected to us with a video, bottom right. You can submit written questions now. The oral questions will be done at a verbal oral questions will be done at a later point. We'll open the gates for that. We're hoping that you be a good listener, that you keep an open mind, and that, of course, goes in all different directions, both ways. Be respectful. The City of Toronto strives to be an inclusive public organization. Racist or other forms of discriminatory, prejudicial, or hateful comments will not be tolerated. A note, next slide, on accessibility. For individuals who require accessibility-related accommodation to participate in the information session, using adaptive technologies may work best with the telephone. Panelists will be describing, and this is one of the reasons why I'm reading almost word for word what is before you. Panelists will be describing the content on the slides during the presentation, and a lot of that is to facilitate people participating by phone. The city has become aware of some accessibility limitations within the WebEx platform and has escalated these issues to Cisco, who is the platform developer. The city is committed to working swiftly to address these accessibility concerns and are currently collaborating with Cisco to mitigate them. Future updates to WebEx will enhance access for all online engagement participants. The city will provide updates on WebEx accessibility as they become available. Okay, so here is how the WebEx Q&A function works. You'll see at the bottom right of your screen, if you are connected by video, you will see a Q&A. And when you press there'll be 3 buttons. Sometimes it's there with 3 buttons. You press the Q&A, and you will be able to see and write your question there. Only city staff will be able to see your questions. Later on, in about 40 minutes, your questions will be directed to the relevant panelist and answered during that period after the presentation. If you want to verbally ask your question on the phone, and you're on the phone, I'll go through this again a little later on, the feature is going to be *3. There's also a WebEx capacity to ask a question as well, and that's when you will go to your name under attendee on the right side of your screen, and you will see a function there that allows you to raise your hand, and verbally at the right time, when I open it up to you, when I unmute you, you will be able to ask a question. Okay, so let's start with a project overview. And I'd like to introduce Justin Lewis, who's the Director of Infrastructure Planning and Development for Shelter Support and Housing Administration. Over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Joe. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joe, for facilitating this evening, and thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam, for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome everybody and say good evening. I'd also like to thank everyone that's joining us this evening and invite everybody to share your thoughts with us. As you know, we're going to be going through a lot more about the city's response to COVID-19 for people experiencing homelessness. I'm going to walk you through a presentation that I hope highlights many of your questions that have been asked, and after the presentation, staff will be available to answer your questions and respond to your concerns. Next slide, please. So the next slide speaks to the context of homelessness in Toronto. I'd like to point out on this slide that our street needs assessment from 2018, there's some statistics on this slide. Our last street needs assessment estimated that there was almost 9,000 people in Toronto who are homeless on any given night. 500 of them, plus 500, are staying outside. Homelessness has been on the rise since 2011, and we know that people who become homeless are staying in our shelters longer than they have in the past, with roughly 48% of total considered chronically homeless. And for example, that would mean that they're homeless for about 6 months or more in the past 1 year. Even before this pandemic, our system was running at capacity despite adding over 3,500 spaces in the last few years, which has almost doubled the size of our shelter system. The top 2 reasons people experience homelessness in Toronto is migration and the inability to pay the high cost of rent. In addition, undertreated mental health issues and the opioid crisis continues to contribute to homelessness and housing instability. COVID-19 has only exacerbated these pressures, and everyone in the city is seeing increased homelessness in their neighborhoods. This is a sad reality that we are all coming to terms with, and why addressing homelessness is so important for us as we move through this. Next slide, please. I'd like to point out that Shelter Support and Housing Administration is a division at the City of Toronto who manages the emergency shelter system. We oversee 56 shelters operated by skilled community agencies, and we directly operate 11 shelter programs. As you can see, the availability of emergency shelters varies across the city in this slide. So what this slide is doing is it's showing our programs and where they're located within the communities. So it just gives you an idea. Our knowledge, expertise, and responsibilities is always focused on 3 outcomes. We're looking to provide people experiencing homelessness in Toronto access to safe, high-quality emergency shelters. We're looking to provide people are providing housing-focused supports that ensure homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. So those 3 things are very important, that it's rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Low-income households have access to housing benefit programs that provide affordability and stability. So that's the 3rd outcome that we're always looking for. Providing emergency shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness is an important community service that is offered across the city. Sites are located within communities, which means that they are often located near other community services like childcare centers, schools, and parks. Shelters are located within communities not only because it's important for people staying at these locations to be connected to the community, but shelters are only allowed in areas that are zoned as residential or mixed commercial residential use. We cannot open a shelter in areas that are zoned as industrial. Next slide, please. The next slide basically speaks to shelter programs in the downtown east area. So Ward 13 has always had the most number of beds across all wards. The number of clients and program capacity in Ward 13 has reduced since the start of COVID-19. Before the city's COVID-19 pandemic, the city had 18 programs with 1,933 beds. After the relocation of clients as part of our COVID-19 physical distancing response, the 18 programs now have 1,189 beds. We have added 7 new programs to the ward, which equal 426 new beds. Even with these additions, the number of beds in the ward has reduced to 1,615 beds. This is an overall reduction of 318 beds in the ward. Next slide, please. The next slide speaks to the criteria that SSHA uses for selecting a shelter location. So many of you have asked how we make decisions on the sites that are selected for a new shelter. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes sharing information that I hope is helpful. People experience homelessness for many reasons. Any one of us could experience homelessness. Each person in our shelter system was once a child with hopes and dreams that did not include growing up to be homeless. Our goal at SSHA is to ensure that there are services in all neighborhoods so that as much as possible, people can stay within their community, maintaining their employment, and stay connected to their friends, family, if they're experiencing homelessness. We always comply with city bylaws in Toronto and the Toronto Housing Charter. We work with our real estate division, allowing them to source potential properties based on criteria we provide them. Once a potential property that meets the zoning requirements is identified, we assess the suitability of the location for its access to transit and other services in the community. Services such as libraries, public parks, pharmacies, and healthcare services. In 2017, City Council delegated the authority to open new sites to staff, to city staff. This means that sites are secured prior to commencing community engagement. With our community engagement in our normal process outside of COVID-19, we engage with communities after the site is secured in approximately 6 months before a site opens, and the focus of that engagement is the integration of the new program and service into the community. Next slide, please. The next slide that I'm speaking to speaks to the city's COVID-19 response for people experiencing homelessness. I know that everyone recognizes that these are extraordinary times, and as such require us to deploy unique solutions. Since mid-March, the City of Toronto has taken urgent action to achieve physical distancing in our shelter system in accordance with the Ministry of Health guidance for congregate living settings and to save lives and protect vulnerable people who are at great risk of COVID-19 related harms. We have opened more than 30 new temporary facilities for physical distancing, isolation, and recovery. We have moved more than 3,600 people to achieve physical distancing. This includes moving almost 2,000 clients into 20 hotel and interim housing sites, 300 spaces being created in 7 temporary shelter respite sites for physical distancing, over 1,500 people being moved into housing through the Rapid Access to Housing Initiative with housing allowances and rent geared to income. We have assisted more than 700 people who were staying outside to move into safe indoor spaces. And given that our normal practice is to open maybe 1 or 2 sites a year, opening 30 has been a significant amount of work. And I do have to commend our staff in SSHA. They've done a great job at doing that. Next slide, please. The next slide speaks to temporary shelter programs activated in response to COVID-19, and that is by ward. So it's a ward map that explains how those shows the 30 plus facilities across Toronto that have been opened and closed as a part of the COVID-19 response. The programs that have closed are the temporary programs we opened initially in community centers at the onset of the pandemic. They closed as the city transitioned into phase 2 of recovery so that summer programming could commence. Given the number of sites that we needed, the city conducted an exhaustive search for space. We received inquiries and referrals from hotel operators, property managers, community members, developers, and landlords. And as a part of these ongoing efforts, the city secured the Bond Place Hotel. Next slide, please. The next slide speaks to additional criteria for site selection during COVID-19. So during the pandemic, we had to implement innovative ways to respond quickly so that we could do that physical distancing. Our goal saved lives and ensured the healthcare system did not become overwhelmed. We conducted an exhaustive search for locations. In looking for temporary locations rather than permanent locations, we focused on spaces that were more or less turnkey, ready for operations with minimal retrofits required. We looked for sites that would adequately allow us to meet physical distancing guidelines. We also looked for sites that were available right away for us, and we looked for sites that were close to transit and were very accessible. Next slide, please. The next slide speaks to community engagement during COVID-19. And I'd just like to re-emphasize the fact that in normal times, once secured, a shelter can take 1 to 2 years before it opens, and we typically open 1 to 2 sites per year. In response to COVID-19, we opened 30 locations in 6 months, so you can imagine the amount of work that was required there. While we typically engage with communities after a site has been secured, but before it opens, the nature of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we were engaging communities after programs had opened. I recognize that this is not ideal. It is not ideal at all, but it was necessary given the risk of life due to COVID-19. In addition, our SSHA staff, plus over 400 other city staff, were redeployed to our front line, making our typical engagement process impossible to deliver. I know the pace of establishing this site has led to a little bit of frustration, and we are committed to addressing the concerns raised by the community tonight. And that's why we're here. So I want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to share some of our information on our COVID-19 response. And I'm going to pass it back over to Joe at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin, for that general overview of the shelter and homelessness situation in the City of Toronto. Now we move over to David Raycraft, who is the Director of Housing Services at Dixon Hall, who will give a program overview of what will be happening at the Bond Place Hotel and now shelter. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks to everyone here tonight for your interest in the operations of the Bond Hotel and the work that's been done by SSHA and community agencies across the city. As most of you will know, the Bond Place Hotel is at 65 Dundas Street East in one of the city's and is one of the city's interim shelter programs. It opened on August 21st. So we've only been in the building for, what is that, like almost coming close to 3 weeks. The city leased this property until the fall of 2020 with extensions likely through to next spring. The shelter is run by Dixon Hall Neighborhood Services and offers case management, assessment and referral to community services and resources, housing support, harm reduction support, meals, and recreational programming. Dixon Hall has been in existence since 1929, and we are a long-time denizens of the downtown east. We have been working out of the Regent Park neighborhood since 1929 when we opened up as a soup kitchen. And so we are very much at home in the downtown east, and the issues that are important to you are also critically important to us at Dixon. We run a diverse range of integrated service programs through the Housing Services Department. The traditional shelters that you may have heard of are one of them on George Street, the Schoolhouse Shelter, which is a men's shelter and has been open. We've been operating since the year 2000, and Hayworth House, which is in the east end of the city, which is an 83-bed co-ed shelter. In the last 6 months, we also run 2 respites. One of those respites opened up early on in the pandemic, and we are in 3 hotels, including the Bond. Harm reduction is a central tenet of the work that we do throughout our programs, in housing services, but also through our seniors, children and youth programs. And we're happy to be continuing that service and harm reduction supports in the Bond Street Hotel. We have long established relationships with housing providers in the City of Toronto, and we have tenancy agreements and work to support not only the individuals to whom we provide individual case management, but more broadly, we offer broader community supports. And as a multi-service community tenant supporting agency, we can bring in services from our seniors department, from our children and youth department. We look at family reunification, all of those things as critical pieces of building community and assuring that people have access to their needs as they move through a process of recovery. Our residents, currently there are 130 residents at the Bond Street. The occupancy will not exceed 200. It provides services to adult couples and singles of all genders. Some residents come from an existing temporary program that was operated by Dixon early on as a response to the early closure of the Out of the Cold program due to COVID. And some of the individuals, the bulk of the individuals are individuals who are transitioning from the 55, 56, 65 Broadway program that recently closed. Outreach to people currently experiencing homelessness in the Yonge Dundas neighborhood is a critical piece of an important piece of the work that we're doing as well. And even to that, I'm happy to speak about that later in the Q&A, but we recently just moved someone who had a long history of homelessness in the downtown, the Yonge Dundas neighborhood, into the Bond Street Hotel. So I really do believe that fundamentally we can work with the community, and community engagement is a critical piece of the work that we'll be doing. Residents are considered equal citizens of the city and have the same rights, freedoms, and responsibilities as other residents of the city. There are expectations of those individuals as they move into the Bond Street Hotel, and they must be followed when staying in any shelter program and at the Bond Street Hotel as well. Regular resident meetings are held to remind clients of the rules and policies and guidelines, as well as to check in around their needs and to make sure that they're feeling safe in the neighborhood as well. Community engagement is a fundamental responsibility of the operator, and we look forward to engaging not only today, but working with community moving forward as operators of the program. So there are a few programs. One of the things that we've learned through COVID, and one of the advantages, if you can consider them if you can think that there are advantages to COVID, we certainly have managed to implement a few of them into our program. So case management will be a fundamental piece of the work and a central piece of the work that we do with the individuals who stay with us. We'll be working very closely with Streets to Homes and our city partners, as well as a number of other partners. MDOT, the multidisciplinary outreach team, will support Dixon Hall's case management team and work with people who have some of the biggest challenges around mental health and addictions. Harm reduction is a central tenet of the work that we do always, and all access to harm reduction is an evolving reality at the site, and we'll continue to work with our partners in the neighborhood to assure that they have the best and most up-to-date services and support. Regular shelter residents meetings, stressing the importance of being good neighbors and the value of doing that work. And also, I think outreach is a fundamental piece of the work we'll be doing. We'll be working not only with the clients who live at the site, but even beyond that, and as we work with our security teams to do outreach and identify individuals who might be causing problems in the neighborhood. We have engaged a community safety team. That should read 4 community safety team individuals doing outreach in the area on a 24/7 basis. They'll be picking up hazardous waste such as needles and be helping to address inappropriate activities, and we'll be working closely with the MDOT team to identify individuals who may need a particular kind of attention around mental health and addiction supports. There are 2 CST members working per shift inside the building. We have a security team of 6 guards who are available 24/7, and they respond to security issues and conduct perimeter checks in the immediate area surrounding the Bond Hotel. We've just installed new cameras to assure that we have eyes on the street and eyes on each of the floors to make sure that we're monitoring any activity that we may deem as that we need to pay attention to. We're very excited to have embedded in this program. This is something that we've as long-term shelter operators have wanted for a very long time. We're very excited to have a relationship with the Inner City Health Associates. They're providing on-site they will physically be on site with nurses and psychiatric supports, doctors, chiropodists, any number of supports that are traditionally or are challenges for the homeless community. And we'll be working with the MDOT team, as I said earlier, doing case management, and they'll provide a close link and work in partnership with ICHA and the staff team at Dixon Hall. Thank you. Joe.
Thank you very much, David, for your presentation on what is going to be happening at the Bond Place shelter. Both David and Justin mentioned community engagement, and I'll speak to that. I've been contracted by the city to facilitate the community engagement piece. But I can tell you that already, thanks to Councillor Wong Tam, we've had ongoing meetings set up that have already happened and will continue to happen. And they include the local councillor and her office, Ryerson University, the Downtown BIA, and other community stakeholders to share information and to address pressing concerns. The hope is that this will evolve into a community liaison committee, which is typical for how all of the new shelters will be operating in the city of Toronto. The Community Liaison Committee is an advisory body with interested representatives of the community, condo boards, resident association, businesses, local community organization. It can meet semi-regularly. Very often they meet once a month, once every second month. They address questions, share information, discuss and collectively solve community problems and address community concerns. And at the end of the day, they help towards the successful integration of the shelter into the community. You may be thinking that you might be such a person to sit on this community liaison committee. At the end of today, you will see an email address. You can also access that email address via the city's website. You'll search around a little bit. But there is an email address there. If you think that you might be someone that can contribute to this community liaison committee, we want to hear from you. And we will be very interested in getting something going, frankly, as soon as the end of September and into October and into November. So that's the kind of timeline for this community liaison committee. To support that, for the moment, I will be supporting the initial phases of the Community Liaison Committee, getting it going, getting it established. But then Dixon Hall will take over. They have, as David has said, from Dixon Hall, they will have hired a community engagement team to support the work of the Community Liaison Committee. So that's how the community engagement piece is going to roll out over the next little while. Once again, if you are interested think you can make a contribution to that, we want to hear from you. We want to engage the best and the brightest in our community to make sure that the integration happens in a good and positive way for all. Okay, we've talked at you for a long while. Now we're moving to the questions and comments section. There are 3 ways that you can basically participate in this conversation. One way is to click the button at the bottom right of the screen. I see people have already done that. We have 17 questions that are all lined up on that side. That is a nonverbal typewritten way of participating in the conversation. Our panel will answer and respond to these questions and concerns. Now, the second way to participate, you will notice that you are defined as an attendee. Beside your name as an attendee, you can press some buttons on the right side of your screen, and you'll see your name. And beside your name, there will be an ability to raise your hand. If you want to ask a question verbally, raise your hand. An order is created, and I will go from top to bottom in order of people putting their hand up. Once you have spoken, please unselect your hand icon after your question. Otherwise, it gets quite confusing. And make sure that, when you do ask your question, that you are doing so in a way that follows the code of conduct guidelines that we spoke about before. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. And here's an important thing. Any questions that are not answered because we will have run out of time, we will include in the notes that will follow this meeting. It'll take a couple of weeks to pull those notes together, but within a couple of weeks, you will see them posted, your questions and the answers posted on the website. One of the things that we've noticed is that in previous meetings of this kind, using the WebEx platform, is that sometimes the audio symbol by your name is not present. If you don't see that symbol, it means that your audio is not connected properly for one reason or another. You can do one of 2 things. You can go to the 3 dots beside the X in the middle of the bottom of your screen and change the way you are connected. That might get a little bit complicated. What people find easiest is just phone in. And if you have a pen there, you can write down this number. It's 647 418 2004. There's an access code as well. Sorry for all these numbers. It's 132 444 5966. That's how you go through the WebEx and get, if you can't go through the WebEx, then you go over to the phone function. If you are phoning in, you will do a *3, and that will put you in the queue to ask your questions verbally. I will go backwards from the verbal questions to the written questions in the priority in which they have been placed, just so you know. And once again, any unanswered questions will be handled in the written notes that will follow this meeting. So we'll go on to the questions, and I think that staff are going to be giving me the ability to manage these questions. So we'll start with, given that we have 22 questions on the Q&A side, written questions, and I'll assign these questions as well. The first question, and I will read them as they are presented. The first question is this: I would like to understand what security and community safety measures are put in place to protect existing members of the community. All previous efforts by the city have failed to protect residents. Way more crimes and drugs are consumed in our neighborhood. And that question was going to go to David, and maybe Justin and Monica will also want to answer that question. David, you can start.
Thanks for the question. So we have a robust security team, much larger than we have traditionally. So we have 4 individuals who will be doing perimeter walking through the neighborhood as far west as Bay Street, north to Bloor, and south to Queen, and east to, I believe it's Jarvis. They'll be doing any number of things. They'll certainly be checking in with individuals that we know and individuals who are currently residing at the Bond Street Hotel. They'll be picking up needles and doing that work. And we'll be working, again, as Joe has alluded to, we'll be working very closely with Community Liaison Committee to understand what emerging needs transpire, and what happens and how we respond will be iterative based on the needs in the community. Understanding that the challenges in the neighborhood, as you have said in your question, preceded the arrival of the opening of the Bond Street Hotel. But we do look forward to working very closely with community to make sure that we're responding as best we can to the needs of individuals living in the neighborhood.
Justin, Monica, do you also want to answer? We can move on as well.
Hi, Joe. I'm just wondering if David could maybe speak to his relationship and partnership through the operations with the police divisions in the area.
Sure. We've been working with 51 and 52 Division, and we have longstanding relationships with them. As I said earlier, we're operating 3 hotels, and all of them in the downtown core. We are working with the community liaison officers at this point. They have continued to visit the site, and we make access to the site available, and we continue to work with them, and we'll continue to build that relationship. We're also working very closely with the Young Dundas BIA and using some of their data to understand the existing challenges in the neighborhood and making sure that we have a tight, quick response, responding as quickly as possible to these needs. There are a couple of numbers that I'll share. One of them is the bond central number. I'll share those at another time. I might put them in the chat for you.
Okay, Monica, Justin, are you, is that good? We're good for that answer? Okay, thank you. The second question has to do with mapping. Can we see co-locating crimes and drug overdoses on the same map, please? Why is always seen from one single lens and no consideration is given to community safety when all prior city promises and efforts fail in addressing any of our concerns in the past? Some of that has been answered, but certainly the mapping piece may be of interest to folks. Maybe David, do you want to try with that?
Well, sorry, Joe, can you repeat that?
Yeah, the issue of correlating crimes and drug overdoses on the same map. Maybe that's more actually of a city question, whether that kind of data exists. And
I would also like I would like to take I'd like to answer that too. I think we're working very closely with the security team at Ryerson University as well, and they already have identified some of the hotspots. Some of the hotspots for drug use in the neighborhood have been identified by the BIA, and we're working with them so that we're certain that we're doing those checks and that the community safety team is doing regular checks to those neighborhoods and to those hotspots to break things up and to make sure that people are safe in those situations as well. Asset mapping is a kind of exciting opportunity where we get to look at what it is that takes people to those hotspots, and working with the BIA will give us an opportunity to think about alternative approaches to creating safer spaces in the neighborhood.
Thank you very much there, David. The next question, Justin, you wanted in on that question?
Sorry, Justin, Joe. I just wanted to, maybe that question was also geared to the presentation that I gave with the maps, with the information on them. The maps that we gave and the presentation that we gave is based on Shelter Support and Housing Administration Division, so it would only be relative to the homeless shelters throughout the City of Toronto. The information relative to crimes and where that exists throughout the city would be something that would have to be given by the police, and that could be a possible thing that they could work on in the future.
Great, thank you, Justin. The next question for Justin is, why can't you open a shelter in an industrial area? What is the logic, the science behind where you decide to open shelters?
Sorry. So the logic I went through in the PowerPoint presentation, all of the logic relative to siting or looking for a shelter and the criteria that we go through. But I think one main reason why we would not put something in an industrial area, a shelter, is because it is a residence. It's where someone resides. And we have to be careful not to put those types of services in an industrial area because there's no access to services. So if an individual needs to access services such as, a pharmacy, a library, all of those types of things, even transit does not necessarily go into an industrial area. So those are the reasons, but citing our locations, it also has to do with zoning. And an industrial area is not zoned as a residential area. So we can reiterate that information through a response to the community after this and make sure that we also reiterate the criteria that we go through for citing a shelter.
Thank you, Justin. Monica, did you want in on this as well? Put your unmute on. You're muted.
No, I think Justin answered that one.
Great. Okay, the next one is on this theme. Is the purpose of this to make the downtown uninhabitable? Are we looking to make the downtown area that is only safe for drug dealers, creating a concentrated black market area for drug dealers. Justin, Monica.
So I can answer that one. I think, as mentioned earlier, this particular ward has always had a large concentration of services and supports, and therefore we've had shelters or people experiencing homelessness. There is also a history of pockets of this ward, just having poor people living in this ward for many years. And so I think, no, we don't want downtown to be uninhabitable, and we certainly want all parts of the city of Toronto to be shared by all citizens and for everyone to feel welcome, supported, and safe. I will say that the city has created the Downtown East Action Plan. And certainly I think there's an email that will be given out at the end where we can send you the link to that action plan. It is the only ward in the city that has this kind of dedicated resources and actions to look in a comprehensive, cohesive way at some of the real issues going on in this ward. I think the councillor could certainly also speak to that. This action plan is in place until 2023. And so some of the resources aligned with it is coordination amongst service providers, so that we're looking at how resources are being used. We're not duplicating things. We're looking at what our strengths are, what our gaps are. There's been everything from enhanced street and laneway cleaning by solid waste management. There's been enhanced resources for parks ambassadors and parks cleaning. And again, this is concentrated in the Downtown East area. There have been enhanced outreach resources through Toronto Public Health, The Works, as well as Sherbourne Health Centre. There has been a lot of training dedicated to staff working in this area to build capacity around things like de-escalation and crisis management. There is an ongoing focus table with key social service supports working in the area to ensure that our plans are moving forward and we're hitting the targets that we want and having good communication. There are continued connections with resident associations and BIAs, as well as other stakeholders, to ensure that progress is happening. And there's tracking of public realm development. So when we are developing different areas, how that impacts kind of the bigger geography of the Downtown East. And that includes anything from the Regent Park revitalization, the George Street revitalization, the supervised consumption site at Toronto Public Health, the Community Crisis Response Program. So I think, as you've mentioned, there has been identified this is the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. And we certainly both, want to support folks and find ways to mitigate risks for people who are using substances and save lives, while also ensuring that the community is inhabitable for everybody and that different people have different needs. So I hope that helps answer the question. And as David mentioned earlier, I believe that 51 division in particular has their community teams. They've got 2 teams on 24 hours a day, and they have really good connections with community providers in the area.
I think that's comprehensive and a great response, Monica. And I also think we have a unique opportunity as a neighborhood center and working with community partners to improve the challenges and get better at providing support to the men and women who have a place to stay. Many of the men and women, most of the men and women who are living at 65 Bond today are people who have come from that neighborhood, but prior to moving into the bond, they were either living on the streets or living in emergency shelters.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go over to a verbal question. Firas, I'll open it in a second. I'll unmute you in a second. I noticed that you've also asked a lot of written questions, so this is your shot, and we're going to then share the floor with other people after you as we go back and forth. So Firas, you have up to 2 minutes. Firas, are you there? Firas? Hello, we're having trouble getting him.
I think Firas, the audio is not connected.
Okay, Firas, you may want to phone in as I described during the early parts of the meeting. So you might want to do that, and that might give you a better shot at getting in. So we're going over to Jennifer. I'm putting you on to ask your question or express your concern. Jennifer, over to you. Jennifer. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, there we go, Jennifer.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. My question is, St. Michael's Choir School is the largest presence on Bond Street between Dundas and Shooter, immediately across from Bond Place. It's a unique school with children as young as 7 crossing Bond Street between school buildings constantly through the day, so they are always outside in that immediate vicinity. I'm just wondering, we've been talking a lot about it in the school community, and I don't see the school mentioned, in the community stakeholders, and I'm wondering why the city and Dixon Hall have not reached out to the school community to understand precisely it's a very specific and unique risk with these very young children, and how to guarantee their safety, and something that's quite different from other types of community presence, these very young kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's a good question. I'm going to mute you now, and I will say this, that and I'll give the floor over to David in a second. St. Michael's Choir School did participate in the community walk that we had last week. They, of course, also as a major stakeholder in the area, will be invited to participate in the community liaison committee. David, you may have more as well. If you could unmute yourself.
It's a good point, Jennifer, and an oversight on our part, because we have spoken to the principal and program director at the school, and we're building a relationship with them. And we also have identified places where people have traditionally been hanging out in that neighborhood. So we're going to be able to sort of mitigate some of those challenges that they've experienced over the last little while when there was not roving security, if you will. So thank you, and we'll correct that and make sure that they're recognized as stakeholders.
Thank you very much, David. The next question is a written one. And it is as follows, and I think this one is going to go to Justin. So, do you think that placing this shelter within a few hundred feet of one of the largest tourist attractions, the Eaton Center, is a wise choice? Maybe addressing the relationship of the shelter and the Eaton Center's involvement in this project. Justin.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So I think this, the response to this question is it really comes back to what we normally do, Joe, and what we normally do is not what we did in this instance. So I think that, when I'm speaking, and I think this is a great question, when I'm speaking to what our goals are as a city, is we're always looking to open shelters throughout the city of Toronto so that people can stay within their communities. And I think that goes back directly to what David responded with, saying that individuals at this location are from within this community and other providers or other locations. Now, under normal circumstances, like I've said, and I'll echo this again, we always look for shelters in locations that meet city bylaws. And that means locations that allow shelters as of right. We work with our real estate division to find feasible buildings and locations. We seek out sites that are in close proximity to community services like libraries, public parks, pharmacies, healthcare services, and public transit. So in this instance, and with the instance in our response to COVID-19, we were looking for locations that would fit that criteria, and the Bond Hotel did fit that criteria. So that's why we chose this location.
I think it all, sorry. I think one of the other things that we've noticed in the operations of the other hotels, that we're providing individuals with a room, and that makes it has an immense, a real shift in how they feel. They feel honored in different ways, and they have a place to go. So it's incumbent on us to develop effective programming at the site to make sure that people have access to programming that will occupy their time differently. They're not being asked to leave at any point during the day. They can actually close the door behind themselves and have private time. And I think that it's easy for those of us who've been housed most of our lives to not understand those things, but I think this is a fundamental shift for many of the men and women that we're working with. It's different from a shelter. We're calling it a shelter, and it is in fact operated as a shelter. And there was a question in the chat about rules and regulations. We are still bound by Toronto shelter standards, and that is what we do as operators at all of our programs. But this is a unique opportunity to demonstrate what housing can be for the individuals who are living there today, and we will continue to work with them to find appropriate, stable housing.
Thank you very much, David and Justin and Monica on this. A series of questions, and I think I'm going to group them all together. And if you need to write it down, David, Justin, Monica, from one person, Rama, thank you for your questions. I'll read them, as many of them as I can kind of read quickly as I scroll through. One is, how long is Bond going to be used for this purpose? A second question from Rama is, hey, why can't we divide these shelters around the city instead of concentrating them in one area in downtown? Is it because the residents of other wards reject these projects and don't want homeless people in their neighborhood and the city accepts that? Why aren't there any shelters in the Etobicoke areas or some other wards? My neighborhood around Jarvis and Wellesley these days. It started with COVID, and we have had many incidents because of the concentration of homeless shelters around here. I hear this complaint from lots of neighbors and people living in the area. And one more, can you show us any examples of success stories that resulted from the current homeless policies? Any whatsoever. Okay, those are a series of questions from Rama. I'll give each of you an opportunity to answer. Maybe starting with Justin, you're smiling, so let's start with you. Tough questions.
Yeah, they're great questions. I mean, they're probably questions that a lot of people have on their mind. So that's what we're here for tonight, is to respond to those questions. So I can see some of the questions from Rama beside me. So I'm just looking at why can't we divide these shelters around the city instead of concentrating them only in one area in downtown? Is it because the residents of other wards reject these projects and don't want homeless people in their neighborhoods and the city accepts that? I think that question again, and it comes back to the criteria that we cite locations for shelters. It comes down to where the bylaws allow for residential not industrial or commercial use. It is we are not looking for specific to Ward 13. We're not just looking to site our shelters there. We do recognize that there is a large amount of shelters and homelessness services in this area, and we are doing our best. SSHA does our best, and Toronto staff work to ensure that those services are spread throughout the city and where they're needed. So I think that addresses that question, and it also addressed the why aren't there any shelters in the Etobicoke area or some other wards. I live in the Etobicoke area. There are a few homelessness programs out here in the Mimico area, and there's nothing stopping shelter services or homelessness services being in this area of the city. It also comes down to real estate. The City of Toronto has a difficult time finding real estate and buildings that are sufficient for us to offer programs and services from. So I think that answers those two questions. I'm going to pass it over to David or Monica and see if they want to address some of the other questions.
Sure, I can go first. I just also wanted to talk about that piece a little bit more, that some of the feedback that we get when we do open a shelter in, say, Scarborough or North York is from those communities is that, well, there aren't services and resources here, and you're isolating folks that rely on being near a hospital or being near a social service agency. So there's definitely different ways to look at that, but certainly we know that people don't, not everybody's from downtown Toronto, and some people do end up gravitating towards where services are, where they can access the supports they need. And absolutely, it's beneficial to have supports across the city, and homelessness is something for all Torontonians, not just one area. I can speak from experience. I'm running one of the largest shelters in Canada in this ward, and we're looking at the George Street revitalization, and we've gone from having 600 clients at Seton House. We've opened a shelter in the West End at Runnymede in St. Clair, and there was a process we had to go through with that community, and it has worked out well. And we're now opening a shelter in Scarborough, so we're in fact moving beds, some of the beds from Seton House out of this ward to different areas, and hoping to build capacity and resources in different areas of the city. But as Justin said, there's also criteria, real estate, all sorts of different factors that come in. And certainly when we look at housing folks, and that is the ultimate goal here, we're looking at housing people across the city as well. In terms of the other questions, sorry, I don't want to make everyone wait while I'm reading. So it's not that residents have rejected projects going into their neighborhood. The way that the process is set up now is, I think currently, jump in Justin, there is delegated authority through City Council. So it's not that citizens in a particular area get to vote for or against a shelter, is that if we meet the criteria through the city, we're able to open a shelter and then work with the community about how to mitigate risks, build partnerships, and really, David's already started down that road, but we're hoping as a future state, residents living in the area can also participate in building connections with folks living in the shelters, and that people didn't start off as homeless. People are people. They don't want to have labels of homelessness. They want, their own home. They want to integrate. They want to go to Tim Hortons for coffee. They don't want to be in the middle of nowhere where there's no amenities either. So, back to the comment about the Eaton Center, absolutely. We have folks that want to do, you know, normal adult things. So yeah.
David, did you want to address this? And you know what, I want to pass it also back because there is another question that's really on this theme. And I don't want to miss this theme. The question or the comment is, we had 2 projects in the Eglinton area and the residents had demonstrations and rejected it, and the city accepted their demand. Maybe someone can also speak to the accuracy of that statement and respond to that piece. David, did you have anything to say? And then I'll pass it back to Justin.
I just quickly wanted to say that this is part of an emergency response to COVID and a long-standing problem around homelessness. There are significant strategies in play right now across the city. We have a 10-year plan that was approved by council in December, and that calls for the creation of 1,800 supportive housing units over the next each year for the next 10 years. That's 18,000 units. We know that many of the men and women that we're working with at the Bond Hotel and other hotels and emergency shelters are ready for independent living, but there is a significant percentage of them that will require supportive housing. So supportive housing is part of a long-term strategy that we've been working with the city to implement and assure that that happens, and supportive housing doesn't need to be located in the core of the city only. We need to be building supportive housing across the city, in each and every ward across the city.
Justin, the Eglinton question.
For sure, Joe. Thank you. That's a great question, and I just want to make sure that we bring some clarity to the discussion today. There were 2 locations up in the Eglinton area that were a part of our response to COVID-19. The Broadway location was always slated to close when it closed. The lease was always that length of time. It was not because of anything that was done in the public that forced the city to leave that location. The Roehampton is still up there in that area, and the Roehampton will be there for the length of time of the lease that the lease is, and that is a 2-year lease. So I just wanted to provide some clarity there, Joe. So I hope that answers the question for everyone.
Great, thank you very much, Justin. We have another person. Well, we're going to try again with Firas. So Firas, let's see if this one works. I've unmuted you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. We're connected.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate having this, and really appreciate your feedback and input, and asking some of the questions that we have. My main concern is really the security. I have seen this in the past, and I'm actually proponent of shelters and housing and ensuring that we eradicate homelessness in the city. I am really concerned about what is happening afterwards. Security has been not ideal, not good. We've been having more break-ins. We've been having assaults more likely for our residents. Lots of my neighbors, they are afraid to walk their dogs in the evening, especially the females. There is a major problem, and I appreciate that you are now designating like 4 guards for 50 residents who will move there. But I don't think this is anywhere near what we need. The problems that are happening now goes to crime and petty crimes, and we see needles everywhere. So I'm really concerned that this is not effective enough, and I would like to see more resources dedicated for security and ensuring that the community members can integrate in our community in a safe and good way for everyone. I am really concerned about seeing so many drug dealers in our neighborhood. I've been asked so many times at night by people approaching me if I want any drugs, and this is something that I haven't seen before. You can walk to any gas station and there's someone there standing all the time trying to sell drugs to people. This is not something I want to increase in our neighborhood, and it's like I feel that the community is becoming like like a concentrated place for drug dealers. Hey, I don't need to look far. Everything is in one place. It's like we're creating a new market for them. And I'm really concerned about this. I am really interested in knowing if there's any success stories. What happens afterwards? I want to know that at the end, we will actually see a good integration and things will go in the right way. I haven't seen this in the past 10 years I lived in the neighborhood. I only been experiencing this in the past 5 years, and I'm not happy where things are going. So this is all what I have from feedback and questions, and thank you so much for everything and for listening. Cheers.
Thank you, Firas.
Thank you, Firas. And some of the pieces of his concerns have been addressed in your previous answers, but there is at the end Firas spoke about success stories. Are there any success stories out there that you can any of you can speak to?
I mean, I think there are lots of success stories. One of them, am I on mute? Are you hearing me?
Oh, we're hearing you. We're good.
Okay. Thanks, Firas. I think that is astute and it is. I think it's a concern for all of us. I would speak to the access to safe drugs and clean drugs in taking that economic work out of street dealers and recognizing addictions as a medical problem and housing as a medical priority in our city. I think those are success stories that we're seeing in places like Vancouver and in European cities. And I think that we're beginning to see that here, and there's a new emerging discussion around access to safe drugs and safe use. I think those things have had fundamentally changed the lives of many men and women that we know, and we're seeing that happening in cities like Vancouver. And Canada certainly is further ahead than our neighbors to the south, but not as far ahead as some of our European allies.
Monica, you were nodding there. Did you want in on this?
Sure, absolutely. There are definitely lots of success stories. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal really is long-term housing for people and community integration or reintegration. So some of the other things we've been really busy doing during our COVID response is a rapid housing response. And we've been working very closely with Toronto Community Housing. I believe we've housed over 1,500 people in about 6 months. So it's pretty dramatic how much we've been able to accomplish. Many of those folks were either directly from shelter to housing or directly from outdoors to housing. Oh, my cat is trying to make an appearance. In terms of the Broadway site that was mentioned earlier, we have, in the last month, we've housed 21 people, and we have about 19 people just waiting for their units to come up. And definitely somebody like myself or David, who has worked with people experiencing homelessness for a couple decades, we have seen people, I have seen people who have had active psychotic disorders, living on the street, living on grates in puddles for 10 years, not engaging with folks. And we've had teams like the multidisciplinary outreach team called MDOT, working closely with outreach workers, concurrent disorder, nurse practitioner, and psychiatrist to go on the street, do wraparound care for people to stabilize them with medication or other mental health support and be able to get them off the street and improve their health, their quality of life, and get them into long-term supportive housing. So certainly that's the goal here. The goal is not to kind of keep people in this state of precarious housing. It's, you know, we see you know, a lot of reduction around risky substance use behavior. We see improvement to mental health, improvement to health, and an overall improvement to quality of life when people are able to go into their own housing and have the right supports in place. I have many stories I can tell you from the shelter that I work at, and sometimes the success stories are really baby steps. Sometimes they're dramatic. So, for instance, I have 2 guys that we housed in a downtown Toronto community housing building, and they ended up becoming property services staff employed with community housing, working in the building to do repairs and cleaning. And then other things are really just getting somebody to see a doctor. And that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment when we have folks who have been chronically homeless for years and maybe not seen a physician in 5-10 years.
Okay, thank you, Monica. A written question. As a resident who understands shelter residents are my neighbors too, is it possible to ask how existing residents can contribute positively to integrating this shelter into the neighborhood? And what would build better interactions here? David, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you. I think that Dixon Hall has supported the Out of the Cold program for 20 years, and it ended this year because of COVID-19. We have learned so much from our relationship with the faith partners across the city, and I think that therein lies an opportunity and a history that we would like to embed in this program. So through the CLC and through the relationships that we build with the BIA and residents within the program and neighbors, we would like to hear what you have to say about how you can contribute. We certainly think about it from an economic perspective, and we want to be working around economic development in the neighborhood, but we also want to, through our peer programming and the work that we're doing with in the neighborhood, we want to be working with volunteers, and we want volunteers to bring their expertise to support the integration of the Bond Street Hotel and its residents into this neighborhood.
Thank you, David. We have another written question. There's actually 2 of them by the same person, and they both deal with the community safety team. So this will go to David. How do we contact the community safety teams, and what is the response time expected for the community safety teams?
That's a good question. I tried to share in the chat the number, the central community line for the Bond Street Hotel, the Bond Place Hotel, and as well as the front desk number and an email address. It didn't let me do that, so we'll figure that out, and we'll make sure that you get that information. In terms of the response time, we hope that the response time will be quick. But we're working, and it'll be iterative, and we're figuring that out as we go along. We really have only been in the hotel for 2 weeks now, and but we certainly have a more robust team than we've ever had before, and we will work with you to make sure that we're responding in as timely a manner as possible.
Okay, the next question is, can you expand on how many people typically make up the CLC? Maybe David or Justin can take that, and then I'll add some comments as the community engagement facilitator. Do you want to start, David? I know that you said in your presentation that there will be community engagement people. Can you expand a little bit on that piece?
Sure. We're looking at a couple of opportunities. So we're excited to be working with the Dundas Young Dundas BIA. They have some really rich data about hotspots in the neighborhood and where some of the greatest need is. We are in the process of hiring 2 community engagement supervisors, and we're really excited about the resumes that we've received thus far. In terms of community engagement, we will be reaching out to businesses in the neighborhood, other community agencies, and looking at working with a data coordinator to sort of gather the information and data. Also working with 51 and 52 division to assure that we're responding in a timely way and that we're meeting regularly with residents to impress upon them the importance of being good community members. I think that's something that we've seen at the Victoria Hotel, where we're also located, is that as people settle in and people who have had long histories of street homelessness settle into their rooms and settle into the community, they feel more invested in outcomes and more invested in maintaining housing and maintaining their space there, and working with our community housing workers and housing workers to assure that they transition to stable long-term housing.
Great. On the CLC Community Liaison Committee question asked by someone in written format, let me also add this, that basically right now there is a group of people that include some of the major stakeholders in the area, from Dundas Square to the Eaton Center to the Downtown Young BIA, local councillors' offices involved, some other business folks. Dixon Hall, of course, is present, and we've already started to meet on a weekly basis. That will evolve into a community liaison committee, and basically, at the end of the day, we still have to do the terms of reference for this, and it will be created by the community itself. So who the members are. Hopefully it will be a representation of the groups. So making sure residents are represented, community agencies are represented, businesses are represented, the Downtown BIA is represented, and they become the sounding board. The way I sometimes like to describe a good community liaison committee is it brings the outside in to the shelter. So the community has a place to park its concerns and its suggestions and ideas and good wishes and all of that. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for the shelter itself to present itself to the community. And it's in that relationship that is formed that the best possible outcomes are achieved. That's the hope. And that's why the city is undertaking these community liaison committees, to make sure that there's a good integration, and that CLC becomes the tool, the community tool, to help make that happen. It's never perfect, but I've seen them actually in other situations across the city where they've really led to a better understanding going both ways. Again, to put in another advertisement, if you are interested in participating in that, if you can put your best heart and your best mind and your good community safety sensibilities and your good compassionate sensibilities to the case, then we want to hear from you. And there's an email that I'll present a little later on where you can basically present yourself up for that purpose. And then we will figure out a way to engage as many people as possible. Our next question is from a call-in, and it's from Claudia. Claudia, can you hear us, Claudia?
It's Jennifer, but I think you clicked on me instead.
Okay.
Like mine says unmute, so I think you need to find Claudia. It is a little tricky from this end to participate verbally, so you might need to give her a minute.
Okay.
To me again, Jennifer. I don't know how
Okay. We're figuring it out at this end. Claudia, did that work? Is it Claudia or Claudio? Claudia, can you hear us? Okay, so Claudia, I'm going to suggest that you call in and press *3, and that will put you in the same sequence, and we'll get to you if we figure out this technology. It's been a problem with other meetings as well, just by the way. And we'll go back to the questions. We have a question here. How is the city planning to address the classism that exists in these conversations around homeless people and where they live? Increased policing or alienation of people who use drugs in the name of safety should not be city policy. It's a bit of a concern there and a question. Monica, do you feel comfortable answering that?
I will try my best. And thank you for that comment. And that is certainly, you know, something that I take to heart. And it is a balance of different priorities, different understandings of what homelessness means and who's homeless. And certainly, you know, one of the things that I talk about, so for example, oftentimes there are, you know, concerns around children, around homeless people, and I try and kind of help people understand that actually many of the folks staying in the shelter that I work at and probably at Bond Street are parents themselves, and that people come with a whole lived experience and, you know, have had jobs or may have grown up in poverty or intergenerational poverty, and there are different intersections involved. I don't think it's just about classism. I think we can, you know, look at other equity-seeking groups that end up seeking having a lack of affordable or secure housing. And I think in order to really move forward, we have to be able to listen to all perspectives. And I believe that with time and exposure and education, as well as responsiveness to things that aren't okay, such as violence or criminal activity, that I believe that exposure can really have an impact, a positive impact, and change people and bring awareness. I believe people are ultimately good people and may have different levels of exposure to different things. But yeah, you've raised an interesting point. I mean, I think downtown Toronto has always been an area where maybe people experiencing homelessness have felt safer and not have stood out as much. And there's a lot going on in the city with development and, you know, the city continuing to grow, and where do people who need housing fit into all of this? And when we talk about substance use, the reality is that we are in an opioid epidemic, and that we have lost a lot of people to this crisis, some of whom have been homeless as well, and it's very serious. So absolutely, the city has some clear policies around discrimination, equity, and diversity, and that is definitely a lens that we use in designing programs to meet the needs of the subpopulations of folks that we are working with. I don't know that I can give you one quick answer to this, but it's definitely something that I keep with me personally, and something that our division in the City of Toronto talks about. You know, I think diversity for all.
Okay, thank you, Monica. I think we have a Claudia available on the line. We're going to give that a try. Claudia, did we get you? Can you hear us? Claudia, did we? Looks like we're not having luck with Claudia.
I can see she had a mic, but then it disappeared. So she has a headset
Looking for-
also. Good.
Okay, so these are some of the WebEx problems that we're encountering. Okay. We have a question from a verbal question from Bin. So let's see if that works. Hello, Bin. Can we hear you? Bin, your audio is not connected either. So we'll move on to written questions. While hopefully, Bin, you can and Claudia, you can try to phone in. That seems to be working better than connecting through the WebEx. So the next question in a written format is as follows. Given that this ward has the most shelters in Toronto, has consideration been given to a moratorium on further addition of beds and shelters in this ward? I live and also have a business in this ward and have experienced the challenges associated with expanded homeless populations. The issue of a moratorium in Ward 13. Justin, this sounds like a question for you.
Sorry, Joe. Can you just read the question to me one more time?
Yes. Given that this ward, Ward 13, has the most shelters in Toronto, has consideration been given to a moratorium on further additions of beds and shelters in the ward? I live and also have a business in this ward, and the challenges associated and experienced challenges associated with expanded homeless populations.
So I think that if we're speaking to additional shelter beds in this area,
No,
I think that,
this may be a way to understand the core part of this question.
okay, sorry. David, did you want to respond to this?
I mean, I can say that.
This is Kristen Wong-Tam speaking. Perhaps I can try to respond to that if permission is granted for me to speak.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that question. I would say that prior to COVID, there was a commitment from Shelter Support Housing and Administration staff, which is the acronym SSHA that you've been hearing about all night, that there was a commitment from SSHA staff was to do everything they can to actually try to cite no more new facilities in the ward. When COVID arrived, I guess in the middle of March, just about everything changed. So there was an active and ongoing effort from SSHA staff recognizing that there are a sizable number of facilities in the area, and that and it would not be fair for people who were traveling great distances to downtown to leave the communities that they reside in or perhaps that they needed supports in to all then travel downtown. And that was an ongoing effort, and I know that the staff had made a commitment to myself and the local community that they were going to try to just cite services across the city where they can. When COVID-19 hit, that seems to have created a different emergency response and dynamic, which is why the community is not necessarily being consulted in the way that SSHA staff would like before citing any new services. And that's been a rather challenging and difficult situation. But I also recognize that shelter staff have been put into probably some of the most difficult work there in their entire career if they've been working with homeless populations in their entire existence, just because this is a very unusual time that that they have already cited that they, number one, they're doing an enormous amount of new work, but they're also doing it in a compressed timeline. So I would imagine that as the interim programs, and many of the programs are interim, including the Bond Hotel, as those leases and agreements come to a natural sunset end, the intention is to try to do everything they can to actually house individuals as opposed to continuing to shelter individuals. And that's where we'd like to go. I think everybody knows that a shelter is only an interim solution. It is not a final outcome. No one wants to stay in a shelter for the rest of their lives. Everybody deserves a safe place to stay, and ultimately a key and a door and a room and a home to call their own. And that is going to be the long-term objective of the City of Toronto, is to move away from the creation of more shelters, but to move towards supportive housing, adequate wraparound supports. And you'll be hearing probably a lot more in the media very shortly about this new shift from shelters to permanent housing. And that's going to really dominate the conversation moving forward at City Council. And it's going to be coming very fast to the Planning and Housing Committee on September the 22nd. And then that strategy to end homelessness is going to City Council, I believe, in October. And it's October of this year, 2020. So these 30 new sites that the staff have temporarily open, it is unlikely that they are all going to stay open. The majority of them have a sunset clause, which means that there's going to be a natural termination and end. One thing that the community may be interested in, and I'll cite this, one of the first questions I asked city staff when I found out about the program of the Bond Hotel changing was number one, how do we keep the community safe, the community of people that are going to be moving into the Bond Hotel, recognizing the challenges we already have in the area, but also the community that's already around the Bond Hotel. So everybody deserves an opportunity to be safe, feel included, have a sense of health and wellness. And so you've heard a lot about how the staff and Dixon Hall in particular are going to try to strive to achieve that. But then ultimately the second question I asked was whether or not the city was going to turn the Bond Hotel into a permanent shelter. And the response was no. It is very unlikely that's going to happen, simply because the valuation of this downtown hotel is far too expensive to purchase in the long run. So it will most likely simply be an interim use, and all of this effort is to try to manage the outcome to a high hope, but will be a success, not just for the residents who are going to be there, but to the surrounding neighborhood that actually is hosting the service and welcoming these new neighbors. So thank you. Sorry for that long answer.
No, that's good. There have been, I don't know if Justin or David or Monica want to also speak to it, but there are some, we'll get to Claudia in a second, just to follow this train of thought. There are folks that have asked questions around, if you could mute yourselves just for a second, David, Monica, Justin, so I can ask the question. The question about people come to this community because the services are here. Why aren't the services distributed throughout the city to help people in every community? And so there's a few questions on that same theme. So if you want to, I know it was in your presentation, but if you want to go a little bit more deeply into that, Justin or Monica, on how the distribution and the services and the shelters, how the city makes sure that they are distributed in a fair and equitable manner.
But Joe, it's Justin, and Councillor Wong-Tam, I want to thank you for taking that question. My internet was doing that blue circle, so I apologize for not being able to respond to the last question. This is a good question, and I think this question does relate back, Joe, and I do echo what you just said. that it does relate back to our PowerPoint and the criteria for us citing a shelter. I think when this started a few years ago, when Shelter Support and Housing Administration, before my time with the division, was looking at the shelter and homelessness services, there was an identification that the services were more centralized to the downtown core of Toronto. And it's been over the last few years, and there's some presentations that Marianne Berdard, our general manager, has done for some of our committees in presenting to council that shows before about I believe it's 3 to 5 years ago, all of the homeless services, or the majority of them, were in the central downtown core. But over the last 5 to 3 years, we've been spreading those services out through all of the wards, where all of the criteria is met for a shelter to be cited. So if you look at, and if I were able to show you those ward maps today, you would be able to see that, 3 years ago, the services were not in majority of the wards in the city of Toronto. They were mostly downtown. And if I showed you the difference today, you would see that only 3 wards have minimal amount of homelessness services in them at this time. So I think that tells a huge story that we are pushing to move our services out of the downtown core. It doesn't happen overnight, and it is something that our staff at SSHA work hard every day to put in the time and the commitment to move those services out. So I think that's a little bit more information for individuals, but we can definitely follow up with that question and provide that information relative to the maps to show that difference.
Great, thank you very much. Justin, Monica, you wanted in on that as well?
Yep, I'll make it really quick. I think just one other thing to note about the folks that have moved into the Bond Street Hotel is that a lot of them were living rough outdoors originally prior to coming here, and they were actually, some of them were living in Moss Park and Barbara Hall Park, which is, in an area in and around, or in this ward. There was a mention of the Eaton Center a while back, and folks probably know Trinity Square has been a long time place where there have been people living outdoors in that area. So really, we're hoping that this can be a stepping stone. So it's not just about people kind of migrating to the services, but to bring people in from the outside who are already living in the parks or on the sidewalks in this community. And certainly, I'm sure David is doing some work with the street outreach folks who are out there trying to connect with folks, especially coming into the winter, to help bring them inside and support along with that, so that they're not isolated outside. So a lot of these folks are already from this community.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, David, you wanted in as well.
I would just say that as we get better at building services into the program models, and as we open up hotels in other neighborhoods, people begin to feel a sense of community there. The Hayworth House is a Dixon Hall shelter located in the East End at Main and Danforth, and we know that a lot of people who access that shelter and feel very comfortable there, and many of them have had a history in that neighborhood as well. So I think the opportunity is there as we get better at building health services and case management services into programs and opening them up in other parts of the city. We'll do a better job of building responses in other neighborhoods in suburban Toronto as well. And to the councillor's point, it is housing that solves this problem. It's not shelters. Housing solves homelessness, not shelters.
Okay, we will try third time lucky, hopefully with Claudia. I will unmute you, Claudia. I think we might be lucky this time. Claudia, can you hear us? Claudia, can you unmute yourself? Okay. It doesn't seem like we're getting Claudia this way. We tried 3 times. Claudia, are you there? Maybe type in your question, Claudia. Though we only have a few minutes left. Type in your question, and we will try to answer it. If not here, at a later point. We do have another question from a user. I'm going to unmute you. Caller, I don't have the number in front of me, but can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
10. User 10. Yes, great. We can hear you.
Thank you for taking my call. I just had a question about the residents being vetted. I know I listened to the town hall pertaining to the Broadway Street location, and Michelle had said that they weren't being vetted for potential parole restrictions. And I just wondered if they're going to be, she expected the province would be supplying them that information. I just wondered if they're going to be vetting them here at this location, particularly like sexual offenses, just, you know, hearing about the children crossing the street and whatnot.
Good question. Thank you very much. Monica, David.
David, you want to take it?
It's up to you. Go ahead, Monica. I mean, it isn't something that we do traditionally with individuals who live in the shelter. We have, and I would hope, you know, that we hold people to a standard, and we have expectations of them, of their time with us. We work very closely with police divisions in the event that these things become apparent or people break the law. That we work with our partners in Toronto Police Services.
And if I could just add to that, Joe, the purpose of shelters is to provide and have low barriers.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and it's on the theme of the St. Michael's Choir School. Safety for students as young as 7 years old at the choir school. Will there be one of the questions? There's a few questions in this area. Will there be a security guard offered specifically to keep the school children safe from needles and any threatening and frightening interactions with residents? This will be our last question, and then we'll go into the concluding part of the meeting.
So I think the challenges experienced, the folks at St. Michael's School have been experiencing challenges and for a long time, and after having spoken to them recently, they're quite excited about the enhanced security programs, and we're going to be working very closely with them to make sure that we can mitigate those challenges that they've experienced over the last couple of years. Hopefully, this will be an example, and this will be a real value add in with our presence in the downtown core at the Bond Hotel.
So I also did want to say that precedents has been set before that we do have multiple shelters located near daycare centers, and certainly we can learn from the experiences of building those relationships. We actually have one shelter that is co-located literally 20 feet from a daycare center in downtown Toronto. And certainly, you know, I think it's like David said about keeping communication open, building that relationship, and seeing how things unfold.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That will conclude the formal question and answer period of this meeting. Let me say this, though, as we conclude. All the unanswered questions, and if you have about 2 or 3 minutes, if there's a burning question that you would like answered and you haven't had a chance to ask it, feel free, absolutely free. Bottom right corner, Q&A, write it down. We will be putting together a report of today's meeting, and that will be posted online. So all your unanswered questions will be grouped together thematically and presented in the report. Just to conclude, I want to thank Councillor Wong Tam for participating in this meeting and for her contribution over the last several months, several years on homelessness in the downtown core. I want to thank the panelists, David, Monica, Justin. Behind them, there's been a whole background of support, Jennifer, Suhal, Carolyn, Anika, and the city's excellent IT team. The WebEx has failed us a little bit today, but sooner or later we will get that right. And lastly, to all the attendees, this is a part of democracy. This is part of making our city function, and your input and questions and suggestions and challenges have been duly noted. And I think at the end of the day, we hope at the end of the day, that's why we're doing this, is to make this shelter as best as it possibly could, and that it interacts with the community in the best possible manner. Lastly, before we conclude, there's an email address there. If you are interested in being part of the Community Liaison Committee, we'd love to hear from you. Lastly, there is a survey. It's optional. You will see it in the Q&As at the very end. I'm just making sure that it's there. Yes, it is there. At the bottom of the Q&As, there is a survey that you may be interested in filling out. And it basically is on this particular meeting. And any tips, any suggestions, any comments that you have on this particular meeting, we'd love to hear from you. And of course, that's all part of an ongoing effort as we're experimenting with this online meeting format, and we want to continuously improve that experience. So thank you very much to everyone for participating, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye all.